The front door slammed so hard the windows rattled. "Get out," my mother shouted, throwing my backpack into the snow. "We don't need a selfish daughter in this house." I stared at her, barefoot on the freezing porch, my socks already soaking through. "Mom, please, I didn't take anything." "Stop lying," my father barked as he stepped forward and pointed toward the street. "Ryan trusted you." Behind them, my older brother lowered his eyes like he was trying not to cry. "I never wanted this," he said quietly, "but she stole all my savings." I whipped around to look at him. "Ryan, tell them the truth." "He didn't even meet my eyes." "I wish I could. That was all it took." My father pulled the front door shut. The deadbolt clicked. Then came the words that hurt more than the cold. "You made this choice," my mother said through the door. "Figure out your own life." The wind hit me like a wall. Snow whipped across the driveway, stinging my face as I picked up my backpack with shaking hands. I had no coat. My phone battery had died earlier that afternoon. The nearest place I could think of was over 3 miles away. I looked back once. Not one curtain moved. Not one light switched on. Not one person came after me. 4 hours later, the hospital called my parents. And when my mother walked into my room and saw who was sitting beside my bed, she stopped breathing for a second. Then she whispered in a trembling voice, You can't be here." The snow swallowed the sound of my footsteps almost immediately. Every breath burned my lungs as I pulled my thin sweater tighter around myself. The blizzard had arrived faster than anyone expected. Cars were becoming scarce, and the sidewalks were disappearing beneath fresh layers of snow. I kept replaying the last 15 minutes in my head. Ryan's accusation. The money inside my dresser. The look on my parents' faces when they found it. No questions. No hesitation. No chance to explain. Just judgment. I wanted to believe they would come after me once they calmed down. Maybe Mom would realize something didn't make sense. Maybe Dad would remember I'd never stolen so much as a candy bar. I looked over my shoulder. The street behind me was empty. The house had disappeared into the white curtain of falling snow. The cold worked its way through my clothes until even moving became difficult. My fingers refused to bend around the straps of my backpack. My legs felt strangely heavy, then strangely light. A pair of headlights finally appeared through the storm. I tried to wave. Instead, my knees buckled. The last thing I remembered was collapsing into the snow as someone shouted from a distance. When I opened my eyes again, if only for a moment, I saw bright lights above me, heard unfamiliar voices, and felt warm blankets wrapped around my body. "She's severely hypothermic. Call her emergency contacts again." We are still not getting an answer. Hours passed before someone finally reached my parents. The message was simple. "Your daughter has been admitted to the hospital. You need to come immediately." The drive to the hospital was silent. Neither of my parents expected anything except an unconscious teenager waiting alone. But as my mother pushed open the hospital room door, she froze. Someone was already sitting beside my bed. Emily's parents stopped in the doorway, too stunned to speak. A tall man sat quietly beside my hospital bed, his back turned toward them. One of his hands rested gently over mine, while the heart monitor beeped steadily through the room. "Who are you?" my father demanded. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked down at me, making sure I was still asleep before slowly standing. Before another word could be exchanged, the story shifts back 3 days earlier, the moment everything that happened suddenly made sense. Our house had always worked by one simple rule. If Ryan made a mistake, someone else cleaned it up. Usually that someone was me. "Emily, can you finish washing the dishes?" Mom called from the living room. I glanced toward Ryan, who was stretched across the couch playing video games. "There are only 2 plates left," I said quietly. Without looking away from the screen, Ryan shrugged. "You're better at it." Mom smiled at him instead of me. "Don't start another argument." So I washed the dishes. Again. It wasn't the chores that hurt. It was knowing no one noticed. A month earlier, Ryan had backed Dad's truck into our elderly neighbor's mailbox while texting his friends. Before anyone could ask what happened, Ryan whispered to me, "Please, Dad will lose it." I took the blame. Dad grounded me for 2 weeks. Ryan thanked me once, then acted like it had never happened. Life moved on exactly as it always did. Ryan was praised for the smallest accomplishments. When he barely passed a math test, Dad took him out for burgers to celebrate. The same evening, I quietly placed an acceptance letter for an advanced academic program on the kitchen counter. No one opened it. Later that week, I noticed Ryan packing around the garage, checking his phone every few minutes. His face tightened every time a new message appeared. "You okay?" I asked. He forced a smile. "Mind your own business." I wanted to press further, but experience had taught me that asking questions only made me the problem. The following afternoon, I returned from school earlier than usual. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard the soft click of my bedroom drawer closing. Ryan slipped out of my room, glanced both ways, and casually shut my door behind him. Inside, he quietly slid an envelope deep into my dresser, then walked away as if nothing had happened. The front door swung open before I could even set my backpack down. 2 police officers stood on the porch. "We're here about a reported theft," one of them said calmly. My stomach dropped. Behind them, Ryan stood with his arms folded, his expression carefully controlled. He looked more disappointed than angry, like he hated what he was about to do. "I told you," he said, shaking his head. "I didn't want it to come to this." My mother turned toward me with tears in her eyes. "Emily, if you took the money, give it back now. We can still fix this." "I didn't take anything," I said. "I swear." My father stepped into the hallway. "Then you won't mind if we look." No one waited for my answer. We all walked into my bedroom. One officer opened a notebook while the other stood quietly near the door observing. Dad marched straight to my dresser and yanked open the top drawer. "Nothing." The second drawer. "Nothing." Then he pulled open the bottom drawer. A thick envelope sat beneath a folded sweatshirt. Dad picked it up, opened it, and counted the cash with trembling hands. It's all here," he whispered. Ryan let out a broken sigh. "I can't believe you do this to me." I stared at the envelope. "I've never seen that before." "No," my mother snapped. "Don't insult us again." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Since the family wanted to handle the matter privately after the money had supposedly been recovered, they simply documented the incident, reminded everyone that a false report was a serious offense, and left. But the damage had already been done. Ryan looked directly at me. "I trusted you because you're my sister." His voice cracked just enough to sound real. "I guess I was wrong." Word spread faster than I imagined. Mrs. Jenkins from across the street watched from her porch as my father dragged my backpack outside. A teenage neighbor stopped shoveling snow, pretending not to stare. Whispers followed me before I had even left the driveway. The Carter girl stole from her own brother. I turned toward Ryan one last time. "Tell them the truth." He held my gaze for only a second before looking away. "I already did." Minutes later, my parents shut the door behind me, leaving me alone as the blizzard swallowed the street. Inside the warm house, Ryan's phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket and read the latest message. "Pay US before midnight. No more excuses." His face went pale. He quickly deleted the notification, looked toward the snow-covered road where I'd disappeared, and muttered under his breath. "She'll be gone before anyone figures this out." The emergency room doors burst open as paramedics rushed my stretcher inside. "Female 16, one of them called out, found unconscious on the side of County Road 8, severe hypothermia, possible frostbite." Doctors and nurses surrounded me immediately. "Core temperatures dangerously low. Get warm IV fluids started. Call respiratory." Outside the treatment room, the driver who had found me rubbed his freezing hands together while speaking with a police officer. I almost drove past, he admitted. I thought it was a pile of snow until I saw a backpack. She wasn't moving. The officer nodded grimly and wrote everything down. You're probably the reason she's still alive. Inside the hospital, staff repeatedly tried my parents' numbers. No answer. No voicemail. Just unanswered calls while doctors worked to stabilize me. Meanwhile, another detective began reviewing Ryan's theft complaint. Something didn't fit. If his money disappeared yesterday, the detective said, studying the report, why does his bank record show a large cash withdrawal that same morning? Another investigator requested additional records. Within the hour, phone data and financial activity began painting a very different picture. Across town, Ryan's confidence started slipping. Every new question from investigators forced another nervous answer. Then came requests for his text messages. His face lost its color. Back at the hospital, warmth slowly returned to my hands. My eyelids fluttered open. The room was quiet. Someone sat beside my bed, holding my hand with a gentle, reassuring grip. The nurses greeted the visitor with quiet respect, almost as though they already knew him. I turned my head just enough to see his familiar silhouette. My voice was barely a whisper. You actually came. He squeezed my hand gently. I told you that if you ever truly needed me, I would. Before I could say another word, hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway. My parents had finally arrived. The hospital room door swung open. My mother took one look at the man sitting beside my bed. The color drained from her face. Her hands began to tremble. You, she whispered, unable to take another step. You can't be here. My mother stood frozen in the doorway, gripping the frame so tightly her knuckles turned white. The man beside my bed rose slowly. His expression wasn't angry. It was deeply, painfully sad. It's been a long time, Claire, he said quietly. My mother's lips trembled. Dad. The room fell silent. My father looked from my mother to the man in confusion. You know him? My grandfather nodded. I know all of you. He turned back toward me, gently pulling the blanket higher over my shoulders before speaking again. Emily saved my life 3 years ago. Neither of my parents spoke. When the hospital couldn't find a compatible donor, Emily volunteered without telling anyone. She asked for one thing in return, that I stay away because she still hoped your family would heal someday. Tears welled in my mother's eyes. I thought you abandoned us. I never did. He reached into his coat and removed a worn envelope containing years of unopened letters. I wrote to you every birthday, every Christmas, everyone came back unopened. My mother stared at the letters as though they weighed 100 pounds. I listed him as my emergency contact when I turned 16, I whispered. I didn't think I'd ever need to, but I couldn't leave that space blank. Grandfather looked at me with quiet relief. When the hospital called, I came immediately. No one else had. Just then, another knock sounded at the door. 2 detectives entered. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, one of them said, we need to discuss the theft report. Ryan, who had arrived minutes earlier with our father, stiffened. The detective laid several documents on a nearby table. We've confirmed the money was withdrawn by Ryan himself. Another detective added, security footage shows him leaving the bank with the cash. Phone records also show repeated messages from people demanding repayment of gambling debts. Ryan's shoulders slumped. My father looked at him in disbelief. Tell me they're wrong. Ryan covered his face with both hands. They're not. His voice cracked. I lost the money gambling with some guys I met online. They wanted it back, I panicked. He couldn't look at me. I hid the cash in your dresser before I reported it missing. I knew Mom and Dad would believe me. The confession hung in the room. No one argued. No one defended him. One detective spoke gently but firmly. "Filing a false police report is a criminal offense. We'll need you to come with us to complete your statement." Ryan nodded without resisting. As the detectives escorted him into the hallway, my father sank into a chair. "I locked my own daughter out." His voice broke completely. "I nearly killed her." My mother finally picked up one of the unopened letters from my grandfather. Her tears landed on the envelope before she could open it. "I wasted all these years believing a lie," she whispered, "and then I believed another one." She turned toward me. "Emily, I am so sorry. Please come home." I met her eyes for a long moment. "I forgive you." Hope briefly crossed her face. Then I gently shook my head. "But I can't come back." The hope disappeared. "You believed one accusation over 16 years of knowing me. I can't pretend that didn't happen." She nodded through tears because she knew I was right. When I was discharged from the hospital a few days later, I didn't leave with my parents. I walked out beside my grandfather. He didn't promise to erase what had happened. He simply promised that I would never have to earn my place in his family. Over the following months, he helped me settle into a new home, supported me through counseling, and encouraged me to focus on school instead of surviving one crisis after another. I graduated with honors, earned a scholarship, and began building a future where trust was given through actions instead of empty words. My parents started attending family counseling on their own. They accepted responsibility for their choices and kept reaching out, but they also respected the boundaries I set. Rebuilding trust, if it ever happened, would take years. Ryan accepted responsibility for the false report and the consequences that followed. The family favorite was no longer protected by unquestioned belief. The first snow of the next winter fell quietly outside my grandfather's house. I stood on the porch watching the flakes drift down. This time I wasn't afraid of the cold. I knew the door behind me would always open. The cold nearly took my life that night, but the truth gave me a family that finally chose me.